Are we?
Good.
Good, good.
Can I steal the opening for a
Oh,
second?
of course, go for it.
Because I'm not going to teach it.
Oh, I thought you were in charge today.
Aloha.
Admire my tan.
Very nice. Question. What's our theme for the year?
Mastery.
Nice. Did we all know that?
Yes.
Awesome. So, mastery. And I just wanted to say, what we're doing here today is a little bit of mastery. Improving a little bit every day. So sometimes we take some of these classes. We're going to take the mandatory update, hopefully next week with me on Tuesday. And yes, that's a required class, but let's not look at it as required class. That's kind of sometimes, oh, we know that. But taking away something, improving, getting better, building your confidence, knowing the contract inside and out, especially for newer people, builds your confidence. So think of this as mastery. You guys are just improving yourself a little bit every single day. And Stacy, that will announce it at a meeting, but our goal this year for mastery, one of our goals, is to know this thing. You tell me what 10.1 is, and I'll tell you the paragraph.
And
To
have it
memorize it. We know it inside and out, but I can't tell you if you told me what 10.1, I don't know off the top of my head. We're going to know it that well. And I got that from a good friend of mine who I was a manager with at Coldwell many years ago, Glenn Blackburn. And he left Colorado, moved to California, started his career over again. And in California, it's a tough market to get into and to do well. He's very successful here. And his first goal was, one, to know the contract better than attorneys, and two, to know the market better than the agents. And he studied the stats. He knows everything, and he knew that and their contract's like 5 times bigger than our contract. He knew it so well they actually put his office next to the in-company attorney's office because he was so good at understanding this stuff. He's doing fabulous. He's killing it there. But that's because he knows stuff and he felt like he had great value when you're talking to your friends and your clients. You know what you're doing. And you don't feel like you're selling. I know some of you think you're just a great resource and you feel confident that you can help share. So anyway, mastery is what we're going to keep pushing this year. And so we're going to really work on knowing this thing so that when you guys go, what's 2.5? We'll say it's inclusion. That'd just be cool. Just be cool.
It'd just be helpful for me when you call with a question on the hotline and you're saying, hey, you know, this is the problem I've got. And I can say, well, according to section such and such, line 2, it states X.
When you call me and say, when's the earnest money have to be returned? I can tell you it has to be returned within 3 days after assigned termination. I don't know the section. So I still have to open this up and find it and tell you it's 8.3. I know what it says, but I can't. I want to know it that well. I can say 8.3, go to that. So anyway, glad you guys are here. Take it away.
All right, very good. Oh, quick photo.
Well, I thought you were taking pictures.
All right, everybody, big smile.
Big smiles.
And you Zoomers, smile too.
Sorry, guys. I'll make it quick.
All right, thanks, Paul.
Come
Come on, you two. Come on.
Yeah, you're gonna have to.
You just have to stand up, come in.
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Thanks, Paul. I'll have to get you a fisheye or something.
No kidding.
That will make us all look weird.
All right, so just a couple housekeeping things. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, welcome. You will see our class the entire time. If you have trouble hearing us, thank you. Just let me know and we'll crank up the volume, change a few things, but I think we've got everything set just fine. Also, if you want to dive in and ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself. I have all of you muted so we don't hear any background noise. And there's a little microphone that's going to have a red slash through it right now. You just click on that and it'll allow you to talk. So feel free to ask questions if you want this to be interactive. And for those of you in the room, when you ask a question, talk a little louder than normal so that they can hear us through the microphone. If you guys have trouble hearing, just let us know. I think that's it. All right, so 2019 contract. Has anyone had an opportunity to write an offer yet on the new form? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Anybody online? Wave your hand. Yes. Okay. So today, what I'm hoping to do in the class is to take you through the entire contract, but put a little extra emphasis on the new changes. So we are going to go start to finish from page 1 to page 22, but we are going to focus in, yes.
Quick question on that. Are you going to go through and update online your interactive contract?
Yes, and actually I updated the interactive contract yesterday. I sent it off to corporate and it should go live today.
Okay.
And I'm going to show you guys right now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the interactive contract, what we're talking about. Up here on the screen, I've got Elevate. So if you log in, and great question, Carrie, thank you. If you log into Elevate, you're going to see a training tab in the upper left-hand corner. Click on the training tab, and then there's going to be a how-to button. And sorry if you guys on Zoom can't see this very well, but when you click on the how-tos, you're going to scroll down to the buyer side how-tos, and the #1 item under that is interactive contract to buy and sell. And as of this afternoon, it will be the updated 2019 version. So right now, when you pull this up, you're going to see I have little yellow squares next to most of the majority of the sections in this contract. If you save this contract to your desktop, when you click on these yellow boxes, it will give a complete explanation of that section, how to fill it out, why it's filled out that way, where to find the information. For example, legal description. If you've never written a contract before, you don't know where to find that, I tell you how to find these things. So utilize this contract, but again, you have to download it to your computer. If you open it here in the website, it won't allow you to click on these boxes.
Oh,
Can you
interesting.
walk through it and show us where it is?
Yes. So let's go back to the main screen on Elevate. So when you log into Elevate, and I'll just take you to the website, it's Equity Elevate 3. So Roman numerals.com. And then you've got your email and your password, and you hit login. And then under the training tab, and under the how-tos button. And then buyer side how-tos, it's called interactive contract to buy and sell. So right there. And then, so yeah, when you download it, I'll just show you a quick glimpse of what this actually looks like. This is the old version again, but when you click on these little boxes, it tells you if you want to confirm, with your buyers how they'd like their names legally to appear on the title. Some buyers want first and last name, others want middle initial. So yeah, it walks you through everything in detail in each section. And I typically only put the boxes in the sections that you have to fill out. If it's a paragraph that's just informational, I won't say anything. But if it's, you know, something that has a line or a checkbox, I'll have a yellow box there explaining it. So that's for you guys to utilize as a resource. All right, that was all I wanted to show you on that. All right, so let's dive in. And yes, as you guys have questions, please do stop me and ask them, because I definitely want to make sure that when you leave today, you're not only feeling more confident about the changes, but you know how to explain them and how to fill out each section. So let's start with one of the first changes that we saw, and I'm going to pass around this personal property addendum, just take one and pass it down, just so that you guys have it for reference. We're not going to fill it out together today, but for those of you on Zoom, we'll kind of talk about it out loud so you guys know, but I wanted you guys to have a visual copy of it so you can see it. It's a brand new form. So personal property addendum is an addition to the contract that was added this year. And just to give you a little background and context, There is a committee, a forms committee that meets, and they are the ones that determine what changes are going to be made to the contract. Now, we used to have changes on an annual basis, and it was really hard to keep you guys apprised of those changes, to swap out contracts on .loop, on CTM, brokerages that used to print out contracts and give you guys packets that were printed materials. Are we short? Okay. I'll get those to you guys. And then, so they decided that they would only modify the contracts if they had a compelling reason to do so. And because we came into a high demand, low inventory market, there were a lot of things that realtors gave for feedback that they thought buyers and sellers could benefit from by making a few changes. So as we go through, I'm going to kind of point out why we have some of these changes, and a lot of them are due to that high demand, low inventory, multiple offer market that we've been in. Some of those changes may go away in the future if our market does change, but typically we're seeing these contracts change every 3 years now. The last revision was in 2015, which became mandatory in 2016. So this revision will hopefully carry us through the next 2 to 3 years. So with that being said, let's flip to page 2 of your contract. And so under section 2.5.4 is the inclusion section. And what we have been kind of up against in recent time is us writing in inclusions that the lenders don't like to see in the contract. So how often are you guys writing an offer and you're putting in your customary appliances? Under inclusions, you write in kitchen, refrigerator, washer, dryer, dishwasher, microwave. Those are all pretty standard. Occasionally you'll have a basement with a pool table and the buyer says, I want the pool table. If it's there, the seller probably doesn't want to leave or want to move it. So you put in the pool table. Sometimes they're wanting things like the outdoor patio furniture, the fire pit, the flat screen TV that's mounted on the wall. So when you're writing those items in inclusions, oftentimes you'll get the call from the lender after the file's gone through underwriting, and they say, underwriter doesn't like these inclusions. You either need to write an amend extend to the contract, stating that these items are being removed from the contract, or you need to write an amend extend that states that they are being conveyed at no value. So we recommend you write the amend extend saying they're being conveyed at no value, because if you take them out of the contract, you don't have anything that's tying that seller to leaving those items. If the seller decides to take those, they can say, well, I know we verbally agreed to it, but we don't have anything in writing. So that's kind of one of the challenges we had. The committee said, well, let's add in a box now under section 2.5.4. And if people want to negotiate additional personal property, they can put it on that addendum instead. Then it doesn't muddy up the water. So I have mixed emotions about this personal property agreement, and here's why. I think there's a couple obstacles with it. First of all, how many times have you guys gone under contract on a property, at home inspection you show up, and the seller has a list of items they're willing to sell? Dining room table, master bedroom furniture. We don't want to take it with us. Here's the price. The buyer can let us know if they want anything. If not, we're going to garage sale, Craigslist, put it up next door. This addendum goes with the initial offer contract. So if any personal property is negotiated after the contract is negotiated, you can't use this addendum.
What do you do?
So that's the thing, is how is this any different than what we were doing before? Because most of the time you're going to negotiate this stuff after you're already under contract. So we're going to be going back to the exact same way we used to do it before. Buyer and seller execute a bill of sale. They sign it at closing. They exchange a personal check. So if for some reason a buyer does know that a seller is going to be selling something, or they want to negotiate property into the sale when they write the offer, that's when you use this addendum. No other time do you use it. This addendum says on page 2, proposal expires unless accepted in writing prior to the expiration of the real estate contract acceptance date and deadline. So that right there lets you guys know you can't use it after the fact. The other challenge with this addendum that I want to point out is that on here, number 7, and for those of you on Zoom, I'm going to read it out loud. Item number 7 on the personal property agreement, a UCC search is or is not conditional and satisfactory to the buyer. What is a UCC search? Does anybody know what a UCC search is?
Is that for like easements and property?
What did I hear in the back?
Uniform commercial.
It is Uniform Commercial Code. And so how that ties into residential is slightly confusing, but what can happen is someone can have personal property as collateral for a debt. And oftentimes you see that in commercial transactions, businesses, for example. So there will be a lien on office equipment, on inventory. So this addendum is asking if the buyer is going to want a UCC search done to make sure that the personal property they are buying does not have any liens on it.
They might have money owed on the TV or something.
Correct. Correct.
What about like solar panels?
I don't think that falls into this category, but that's a really good question. Yeah, I think solar panels are going to be a little different.
We took this class from Damien, and didn't he say solar panels were included?
Oh, did he say that?
He said that they would be,
Wow.
they
Yeah,
would come up on
which
the
is-
UCC search,
he
yeah.
was like really not happy
Yeah.
about the solar panels, because he said that is the biggest issue with this is the lease, transferring the
Sure.
ownership.
Yeah, he was saying if you
and-
have solar panels, you better really be investigating the
Because
situation.
the buyer or the seller may not even be aware that they're on a lease. They may think they're owning them. And
Which, how can you think that you're owning them when you're making a monthly payment towards them?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know that. But that was one of the things. And he also said that agents can't do the search. Your buyer has to do the
Yeah,
search.
and that's the thing is this
Yeah.
doesn't identify who's responsible for conducting the search and who's responsible for paying for it either. And what-
He said that the.
he said we shouldn't do the search.
Yeah. Yeah, and then what happens if something comes up?
Yeah.
Did you have something you wanted to
And
add?
I was just gonna, I mean, you need to find out whether or not they're real property because they're attached to the home. They're attached, but they're purchased separately. So
Mm-hmm.
like any major thing on a home, if there can be a lien against it.
Yeah, for sure.
When you do a major, like a remodel almost, there can be a lien against that. You make sure that things are fully owned. But it is real property, it's not personal property. But it could have been purchased
Mm-hmm.
and there can be a lien against it.
Mhm.
So yeah, they don't like this.
No, we don't like this
There's
new
gonna be
form.
changes mid-season already. that we're
Right.
talking about.
And he talked about that
Yeah.
too.
So yeah, from our perspective, we'd prefer that you just write personal property in the inclusion section of the contract. And if the lender wants you to do an addendum that states it's being conveyed at no value, that's how we do it. So stick to the same practice. I think there will be time and place for this, but Todd and my perspective is that we are thrilled with this form. So
Could you put in there at no value in the inclusions?
yeah, you could write that in. Yeah, you could absolutely write that in. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Following personal property items are being
Just-
conveyed at no value.
To nip it in the bud.
No,
No, can't do that.
we're gonna really go into this in the mandatory update. But because this is part of the contract, and if you say that there's no value to it, you're actually committing loan fraud
By using this addendum or by writing it in the contract?
by using the addendum or anytime actually saying no value now.
Yeah,
Saying
that
no
was,
value means,
that's what I understood.
and the issue with the bill, we will go into this again.
So now
Sorry.
using the word.
So try and talk them out of personal property at any
At any
cost.
cost, yeah.
And you know,
Don't
just
want it.
recently I've seen more included, even in the MLS broker remarks.
Mhm.
Hot tub, da included, which, like you said, it didn't usually happen until
Mhm.
after you were under contract. But I just saw 3 of them the other day, ones, and they were big homes. They were much more expensive homes, and they were including those things in the broker remarks that seller is giving away, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, that's gonna be awful
So-
in the new
Yeah.
contract.
You write it in, stuff's included. And we don't have to worry about price or no value or anything until when.
Till the lender
Lender,
says something.
underwriter.
So you wait till somebody says something.
Yeah.
And then we gotta figure out what we need to do. But we make this, this was really made for like mountain properties. right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes
exactly.
But when we make this, and there has to be fair market value, we can't say 0, we can't say $10, that's not for consideration, it's supposed to be fair market value. Now, what the heck that means, I don't know, Is that eBay value, is that Craigslist, I don't know.
That's what he said. David said it was like garage sale value.
And that's what they means.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
It's up
Yeah,
to
yeah, the court.
interpretation.
No, that's true.
I mean, this is all practice until it's real.
Right.
Mhm.
When this is written on here and you say it's the hot tub for $1,800, that's no longer part of the sales price. That $1,800 has to come in
Come
cash
off.
In,
Yeah.
On top.
on top.
There was also something that was, it was really a mess because they said if you do something for 0 value at the seller's convenience to leave it, and then the seller decided to remove it all, but the buyer thinks it's staying, there's no recourse because there was no value. So there was no harm because you said it wasn't
Because
worth
you said it was
anything.
Mhm.
And so it really was scary.
If you haven't had any problems, and then there's a problem.
Right.
And that's the thing. I mean, 199 out of 100 times this has all been fine. It's the one time when someone doesn't get their furniture that they thought was included and there was no value, they got no compensation. There's the one time where they were buying the furniture and everything and they got the bill of sale because we had to write a bill of sale and then we don't close the transaction.
Mm.
But I bought your furniture.
They want
I
to
have a bill
Yeah.
of sale. I mean, it never comes up until it does come up.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they keep trying to fix it, and then they find out, well, that's not really the best way to fix it.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to see how we deal with it.
Yeah. And the other thing with this form that's interesting is it says that if the real estate contract terminates, this form terminates. But it doesn't say anything about what if the seller defaults on this form? What happens? What's the repercussions in the real estate contract if something doesn't get left behind that was agreed upon? So there's a few patches that need
Is
to
it
be made.
because it's an addendum?
It's
I
be,
mean, in a court of law, would it stand?
I don't know.
But it stands for what?
Well,
Can you terminate a contract if they don't keep the stuff, you mean?
no, if the contract terminates, but they still want the stuff.
Oh, no.
No.
That's what's nice about
Yeah,
this.
this
That's
does-
clear up the bill of sale and you take, buy my furniture when you didn't buy my house.
Yeah.
This says you gotta buy the house and then you get the stuff too. It's not one or the other. It's
It's tied to the contract.
Yeah.
What we haven't figured out though is, like Stacy said, they take the pool table, they said they leave the pool table, can I cancel the contract?
Or hold up the
Hold
closing.
The closing, because they took the pool table, but part of
It doesn't have any
Any verbiage
any
in there.
Any
language
recourse.
in there that talks about recourse. So yeah, you may have to move forward with the purchase contract because it doesn't say what happens if the seller defaults on this agreement. So
So can I clarify just as a new agent?
Sure.
I can spend another-
Don't let them have any personal property.
Talk them out of it.
That's the best thing.
no,
You
Talk
can
about
get a
it.
better couch, honestly.
So equity does not want us to use this box. Your preference is that we just do not use this box or the addendum.
Avoid it at all costs.
Avoid it as much as possible.
Yep.
Really, this
Correct.
should be our mountain people using this, because they're getting $50,000 worth of furniture, and that is part of it, that's a bigger deal. You should be able to get a refrigerator and a washer and dryer without too many consequences.
Mhm.
When the lender comes back and says we need something done, but then that's when we do revisions. And now we have a new form to do that revision, and we gotta let people know what that consequence means. They might have to bring a check for that washer and dryer and reduce the sales price.
Because yeah, the lender's only going to loan on the real property. They're not going to loan on the personal property. And so that's why they've always wanted you to pretend that it doesn't have value so they can loan on that full purchase price.
Isn't it usually the case that when someone buys the personal property, it's after the fact of this contract, it's somewhere between the contract and closing where they say, oh, I think I do want those 2 sofas. How much will you charge me? And you agree on a price, but that price isn't part of the purchase price. It's here's your
Correct.
check.
Yeah, that's all done between buyer and seller,
And there's-
separate from
Right.
this.
So
Yeah.
that can still happen.
That can be totally.
Yeah.
That's
can still
the
happen.
best way.
Yeah.
No
That's
mention
the
on the
best way.
contract, it's a separate.
It's when they
deal
want to try and
because
include it in the contract.
And not
That it
pay
gets
extra money
messy.
for it. I want the hot tub for free. Write it in the contract.
Which really, got it,
I want the pool table for free. Write it in the contract.
right.
But no, they can negotiate all day long. I want to buy your dining room table so you don't have to move it, and I'm willing to pay you $400 for it.
Right,
That's fine.
That's always the easiest. way.
okay.
Yeah.
We're trying not to lend money on personal property. The banks are trying to protect their interest. They want a loan on real property, not loan on a house that has a bunch of furniture.
And sometimes that zero value works, like a 10-year-old freezer in the basement that's the size of
Yeah,
a
that's a zero value.
buffet, and they don't
Right.
want to haul it upstairs.
Right.
And so, yeah, it has
That
no
really
value
is
to
zero
the seller.
Right.
And the buyer's like, okay, leave it. That's fine. That's still,
Hopefully the lender wouldn't be brought back.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
But sometimes.
Yeah, I
We've
think
had that
they're more
happen.
concerned with the uncustomary personal property items we're starting to put in now. Things that are above and beyond your normal appliances.
TV,
and-
stereo
Yeah, TV.
systems.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, Claire?
Clear as mud.
All right, awesome. So yeah, business as normal. Try and not use this form or checkout box if at all possible. All right, so let's talk about a really good change. Now that we talked about a difficult one, let's talk about a really good change. So section 2.5.5 under parking and storage facilities, we used to have two boxes there. You could either mark whether the parking space was owned or whether it was for use only. They took that out and they just wrote in the language for use or ownership. And it's now up to the buyer. 2.5. It was right under the box. It's now up to the buyer to do the due diligence on whether something is owned or for use only. What we were running into obstacle-wise, and you guys can probably validate this, is you are running around frantically showing your buyers houses. They find a condo they want to write an offer on. It has a detached garage. You don't know whether that's deeded with the condo or owned by the HOA, and whoever buys the property gets to utilize it. So you call the listing agent, you don't get a call back. You call the HOA and nobody's there. What do? What box do you mark? So they're trying to alleviate the stress that you guys have of trying to do all this research up front on things that you're not necessarily educated to do research on. So now it's part of the due diligence process for the buyer to investigate whether something is going to be deeded, which will come up on the title commitment when the title search is done, or via the HOA documents. It will note it in there whether it's owned or not. So that's a good change for you guys.
That's a nice one.
A real good change. So nothing changed with our exclusions under section 2.6. That all stayed the same. Water rights, we're not really going to talk a lot about water rights just because most of your residential properties here within the city are on public water. If you do have a rural property that is going to be on well, the best resource to utilize is the Colorado Water Department website. You can do a well permit search. You can find out all kinds of information about the well and water. And if you need to know whether something has deeded water rights or not, you're going to call your trusted title company to get that information. They can pull that for you.
Stacy,
Yes.
it's Katie. Back on 2.5.5, there's a blank there to fill in where it says, right now mine says NA, but and the use or ownership. What are we supposed to fill in there?
So that's where you would put like a parking space number or a garage number or something like attached garage. Yeah, so that's just helping you describe what that item is. For storage facilities, in the example that I have online, I think I put shed, storage shed, chicken coop, things like that would be storage facilities that you would list out.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Good question. So let's talk about dates and deadlines under the dates and deadline chart, section 3. I want to point out before we run through each of these individually, a couple of the changes that you'll see under here. And several of these are really good changes, and I think you're going to clap out loud. for the first one that we're going to talk about. So under the seller's disclosure section, you will see seller's property disclosure, and this is on your date and deadline chart. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, number 10 down. Underneath that is lead-based paint disclosure deadline. So previous to this contract, how did lead-based paint work?
Sign before you, while you're doing the contract, you
Before
send
the
them both
contract
over
was
signed.
accepted.
Exactly.
And you had to get it from the seller's agent, which was sometimes a trick.
A bit of a feat. So previously, you guys had to call the listing agent or download from the MLS, copy of the lead-based paint disclosure, have your buyer sign that and send it over with the offer so that they are time-stamped, date-stamped the exact same day. We now have a lead-based paint disclosure deadline, which alleviates all that stress. You can now put in 3 days after contract acceptance, 10 days after contract acceptance, 24 hours after contract acceptance. So you're not scrambling around trying to get buyer signatures on a lead-based paint
Nice.
the day you're writing the offer. Yes. Yes. RE Colorado. And that was one of the things they were trying to do to help us all out, because before that was a required field in the MLS. When you entered a listing, you had to now have to upload that lead-based paint disclosure. It helped all of us from having to run around like crazy trying to get this disclosure. You could at least download it from the MLS. So as of current, they do still have that requirement. I don't know if they're going to change it now that our contract has changed. We'll see.
But it would be nice if it's still sat there.
It's still nice.
And we can just pull it and have them sign it.
Yeah,
It
no
would
harm
be
done.
fine. But that was awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Really,
Does
really
that
awesome.
apply to any date that the property is built, or is it still only prior to 78?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So if the property is built after 78, you don't have
To worry about it.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
What else do you have to do even prior to the contract with lead-based paint?
You have to notify them or,
Altogether.
Yeah, that
Pamphlet.
form that's, I can't think of the pamphlet. You have to give the pamphlet.
The disclosure.
Mhm.
Where do you guys get the?
So
It's
there's a
on
disclosure
your equity.
and a pamphlet that you have to send them.
Yeah, so on Elevate, which is the best thing, because there is a real handout pamphlet for whoever has that thing. And how do you prove that you gave it to them? Because they don't sign it, but in a lot of states, we have to give your buyer that pamphlet. So part of your buyer packet, when you meet with a buyer, always send that to every single buyer. Because you never know what house they're gonna buy. You don't know if they're looking for an old house or new house, they change their mind.
That's a good idea.
So, but the email, download it from Elevate, send it in an email, just in the event here's the pamphlet, you're covered.
Yeah. CTM also has that pamphlet.
It does.
CTM.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you can email it through CTM, and then you've got a log history of everything that's been sent. So that's good as well. And yeah,
That's
you
what I
just
pulled it from.
include it in CTM with your buyer agency
But I know
agreement.
we forget to give that pamphlet.
Yeah,
So,
I've fallen victim to that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So to make that part of your buyer packet, you always do it.
yeah.
But
Good
the
suggestion.
lead-based paint disclosure is not on CTM.
Oh, yeah,
that's
It's on-
absolutely.
They're both there and they both go with buyer's agency, or you wouldn't use it for sellers, right? You only use it.
Well, the
Oh,
seller,
you-
the seller is the one that's giving.
If you were listing your house and it was permitted before 1978, you would definitely have that in the MLS with this, I would imagine.
Yes.
You would definitely have that.
Yes. At this
Correct.
point,
If you're a
it's
listing
mandatory.
agent, you want to have that so that they can download.
Yeah.
So it doesn't
both-
matter which side you're on. You're really, if it's before 78, you've got to be doing something with it.
Okay.
Depending on who
But
you're
with buyer's
representing.
agency, it goes anyways, because you don't know what they're.
So when you're
Yeah,
filling
it's a
this
good
out,
point,
if the
Jason.
house is after 78, instead of, the acceptance date, you just put none?
Yeah, you can put none in there. If the home was built in 92, you don't have to have a lead-based paint disclosure. So none would go in that field. Correct.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of
quicker?
course.
None versus NA in
So
this one.
yeah, so I've gotten in the habit of writing none on everything.
Okay.
Instead of NA.
And
Just-
you could, in theory, write NA because it doesn't apply. It would delete that paragraph from the contract completely.
Right. Because that's always tricky for me. But I do now What you do, none.
So those that don't know, there is a difference between NA and none in the contract, and it is stipulated in the contract. And once I have it memorized, I'll be able to tell you where it's at.
You know it's there.
Are we
there.
going to have a little class for memorization?
So
Yeah, we're gonna
tomorrow
do
we're-
flashcards.
2.54 inclusions.
Section 30, additional provisions. That's the only one I've memorized. So it does stipulate in the contract, if you use the abbreviation NA anywhere, it deletes that entire paragraph from the contract as if it doesn't exist. If you use the word none, it just means that there is none. It is not applicable. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so let's do an example. Let's walk through this one. Person is buying a home in Parker in Straw Ranch. Subdivision, platted, no need for a survey, to your knowledge. You write survey deadlines, NA. And in the survey section, 9.1, 9.3, and 9.4, you write NA. Title company pulls the title commitment, determines that there has been a shed installed on the property since the last survey and a fence, and they want a new survey done.
You can't.
You've deleted that section. So the buyer can do the survey. They're going to be responsible for the cost of the survey. But if they find that that shed is sitting in an easement or the fence is on the neighbor's property line, you have a problem. Perfect example of why not to delete out a section.
Hey Stacey, it's Sandra. In that case, you could just do an amend extend, correct?
Yes, you could do an amend extend, but remember that anytime you're modifying the contract, you have to have all parties in agreement. And if the seller says, that was your error, I'm not signing that amend, they don't have to.
Okay, thanks.
The way out for 'em.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you're better just to put none.
Put none. Yep. All right, so any other questions on NA and none before we move on? Okay.
I just wanted clarification.
Yes, no, exactly. That's really good. Okay, so let's, just because I wanted us to be able to hand clap on the lead-based paint disclosure deadline, let's run through a couple of these here on page 2. So the contract can really be broken down into what I categorize as 3 chunks. You've got the beginning, the middle, and the end of the transaction. And so in the sample that you guys have printed in front of you and what is on Elevate, you're going to find that I've written in MEC dates. And these are just suggestions on how to structure out your offer if it's a typical 30 to 45 day closing. So you're going to find that your record title deadline, your off-record matters deadline, your due diligence deadlines, your seller's property disclosure, your earnest money, those are all going to fall in the beginning portion of the transaction. So most of those dates and deadlines are going to occur between 24 hours after the contract's accepted and 5 days after the contract's accepted. And that's kind of how you're going to see this structured out. I like to see you guys use concrete dates in your chart rather than actually writing in 8 days after contract acceptance. I think it's better to look at a calendar, count out 8 days, and then write that calendar date in here. So this is just as a guide for you guys, but don't actually write in 5 days after contract. Do a calendar concrete date.
Do you use business days or just days?
You know, and that's a great question. It actually does depend. So if I'm writing an offer on a Friday, I factor in that the seller's probably going to review offers over the weekend. So I start day 1 on Monday. I don't count Saturday as day 1 and I don't count Sunday as day 1. But if I write an offer on Monday or Sunday night and the seller's going to be accepting offers by Monday evening, you know, I'll start that counter on Tuesday rather than waiting till midweek or end of the week. So you kind of have to use your own best
If you're doing
judgment.
20 days, are you counting weekends?
I will count weekends. So for example, appraisal deadline, that would be, 21 days out. I will count weekends in there. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's just because on a 30-day close, if you don't count weekends, your appraisal is going to be like 2 or 3 days before closing because you only have 5 days in each week and you take out the weekends. So that's going to put you a little too close. If you have a 45-day close, Maybe you want to space those dates out a little bit more for your buyer. And so it's fine to not count the weekends. It just kind of depends on, you know, in a multiple offer situation, a listing agent and a seller, they're going to want tight deadlines. So the sooner you can clip these away, but still be protecting your buyer, the better. So, good question. So then the next chunk, kind of the middle of the transaction, is going to be all of your objection deadlines. So like your inspection objection, your title objection, your off-record matters objection. Your survey could fall in that area if you're going to be doing a survey. Due diligence objections. So that's going to kind of be your middle chunk of dates, and those dates are going to range anywhere from 10 to 15 days. And then kind of the latter part of your transaction is going to be your appraisal, your inspection resolution, your loan, which we now have a loan termination instead of a loan objection. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And those dates are all going to occur kind of 20 days up until closing. So that's how you're going to kind of see these dates and deadlines structured out. Again, modify these as you find necessary for your buyer and their transaction. If it's a cash deal, a lot of these aren't going to apply. And so you won't even have an appraisal. You won't even have a loan termination deadline. If you don't have lead-based paint, that one's not going to apply. So again, just kind of a guide, but that's how you're going to want to break the transaction down when you're referencing a calendar is, you know, putting all of your, you know, initial deadlines in the first chunk, your objection deadlines in the middle chunk, and then your final you know, Hail Mary, if you need to pull the plug because the buyer can't get their loan, that's at the very end of the transaction.
Stacy?
Yes.
For those of us who aren't physically present, can you email that chart to us?
Yes, it's going to be uploaded on Elevate by the end of the day under training tab, how-tos, and interactive contract.
Interactive. Okay, thank you.
Yep, you'll be able to download all of it. Yep, it's my new 2019 contract example. So thank you, Katie.
When we as new agents submit contracts for compliance, will you, is that something you look at, those dates? Do you check those
So
dates?
yeah, so newer agents, if you've had less than 3 transactions, I like you to send your contract to me prior to your buyer signing it, because I'll look at all of your dates. Not only will I look at the check boxes and the lines that you fill in, but I'll look at your dates to make sure that they're in the proper order and that you're spacing them correctly. And you know, when you're representing a buyer, things look a little different than when you're on the listing side and you're representing a seller. So I definitely look out for you and your buyer, and I'll say, hey, your loan objection is 15 days before closing. It's before your inspection and before your appraisal. That doesn't make sense. Let's modify it, and I'll explain to you why. So yeah, you'll just want to email those directly to me through the contract hotline, and then I'll review those. And then once you get them signed, that's when you send them to compliance through Dalu.
Quick question. Are you able to customize each of these to just determine whether you want them business days or just not, like for, I guess, the earnest money, you can say business days, or
You're going to pick a hard date.
You're just going to pick a hard date.
Okay.
So you're going to look at your calendar, and you're just going to pick, you're going to want it to fall on a weekday versus a weekend. Like, you're not going to want your appraisal deadline to fall on a Saturday.
Okay.
But you can make,
I thought there was a place where you like.
you can use this as an example
Okay.
Yeah.
of the days.
Once you have your
CTM.
transactions, you can
CTM,
set up
yeah.
your account in CTM, and then like you can put your deadlines.
So yeah, I think what you're asking, in maybe I'm wrong,
But
but
is asking, does it populate it for you whether you want to avoid business days or
yes.
Okay. That's
Yes,
what I
you
was
can do that.
getting
So
to.
in CTM, you can go in and set up a parent contract.
Okay.
And you can fill out, and I recommend everybody does this, you can fill out every single thing in the offer except for the purchase price, who the earnest money holder is, who the other agent is, and all of your dates. And when you go in there, you can put in the contract date, and then you can tell it to auto-populate business days, calendar days, MEC days, and you can just set that template up. So then you just put in the buyer's name, hit go, and it just fills everything in.
And you can do that on CTM.
CTM. And they do have a video showing how to develop a parent contract.
Okay.
So you can watch that video. Yep. All right, acceptance date and deadline. Typically we're seeing 24 to 48 hours unless it's specified differently in the MLS. You know, seller reviewing all offers by Friday at 9 a.m. My theory on rushing sellers into making a decision doesn't typically work. So if you're going, hey, the seller says offers by Friday, I'm going to put Wednesday on there in hopes that we can get an answer, get it under contract, it doesn't work. It usually backfires. So try to be respectful of what they're requesting. It's going to make your offer shine that much more. Any questions in general on dates and deadlines and how to structure them? All right. So let's talk.
I have one.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
On the inspection, because they also stuck in that termination inspection.
Yes.
Termination
Yes.
one, which is just a little confusing. So the way that I am looking at this point is inspection objection deadline the 7th or whatever. And then the inspection termination deadline the same date, and then the resolution 3 days later, so that they could either terminate on the same day as they would put in an objection. Am I doing that totally wrong?
So I took the class from John Goodman, and he gave us a perspective on how he would structure a contract. And then I think Todd and I are fairly close in agreement with John in what he was saying. So let's talk about the changes to the dates and deadlines. And we'll start with inspection termination. So on line 27 of your dates and deadline chart, it says inspection termination deadline. We did not have that previously. It was inspection objection and inspection resolution. They threw in the termination, again, high demand, low inventory market. A lot of times what we were seeing is an investor or a really savvy buyer would come in and say, I don't plan on objecting or asking you to fix anything. I'm going to do an inspection for my own knowledge, but I will only terminate if there's something catastrophic that comes up. Otherwise, I'm moving forward. So there was no need to have an objection and a resolution because they weren't going to ask the seller to do anything. They would just put an objection date so they could terminate. They added in this termination deadline so that those types of people could just have one date in the contract, make their offer stronger, and say, hey, I'm not going to ask you to fix anything, but if I find something wrong, I'll just terminate. So that's why they put that in. It makes it a little complex when you have a customary buyer that wants to do an inspection, wants to object, and has a seller that is willing to negotiate repairs. Now you have 3 deadlines you're trying to manage, and how do those look? There's actually 2 different ways to do it. If you're a buyer's agent, the way I recommend is you put in your inspection objection deadline, say 8 days out from contract acceptance. That way it gives you plenty of time to get the home inspector out there, review the report. Inspection termination is going to match your inspection resolution.
So backwards from what I have it.
But there is a way there. I'm going to explain.
Because they're either going to terminate or they're going to
resolve. So why have the date sooner when resolution is going to be a drop dead date anyways? And typically resolution occurs 2 to 3 days after objection. Right. So if you're a buyer's agent, you're going to want a termination and resolution to match. If you're a listing agent and you're getting an offer on your listing, you're going to want objection and termination to match. Because what we're finding is some people are stringing out their termination and resolution deadline. And what can happen is you get to inspection objection on a Friday. Everybody agrees to the repairs, drafts a resolution on Saturday. Your resolution and termination aren't until Monday, but you're under agreement on your resolution. You're all moving forward. And Monday you get a termination notice on inspection.
Because they went and looked at other houses on the weekend.
We don't know why.
Got it.
And so if your termination isn't structured with your objection, it could come back to bite you because resolution has an automatic termination in it.
Right.
So resolution, if your buyer and seller don't reach an agreement by 11/59 on the resolution date, contract automatically terminates.
So as a buyer's agent then, even though I would maybe, as a listing agent, maybe I've done it or looked at it this direction, but as a buyer's agent, it would make my offer stronger if we made the termination and the resolution on the same day.
The
My-
termination and the objection on
I
the
mean,
same day, if you're trying to
termination
make
and the
your
objection.
offer look stronger.
Okay.
Yeah. And in theory, you're still protecting your buyer because the resolution, if they don't reach an agreement, you still have the ability to terminate.
Okay.
That, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to figure out how to write this down.
So let's do this. So if you're a listing agent, you would prefer to see an offer come in with the objection and the termination date the same.
Oh.
So the listing agent likes it this way.
And the resolution is going to be spaced 2 days out.
So if they object but they want a resolution, they automatically forfeit their right to terminate because that time has passed.
They're just forfeiting the termination deadline, but if they can't reach a resolution, they can still terminate.
Okay, I think that's right.
Yeah, and that's why it's doubling up on deadlines. Termination, resolution both have the ability to terminate. So we're getting 2 deadlines. So that mean the same thing.
All right.
So the only reason they added in the termination deadline is in case you didn't want to object. You don't have an objection, you don't have a resolution, all you have is termination. But if you want the opportunity to object, you have to utilize. And
all 3.
And actually, you could probably put none on termination if you wanted to, because your intention is to resolve.
And you still have the ability, or unfortunately, the seller might have the ability to just not sign anything and still
then it terminates. But if your buyer's
So-
intention is, I don't care what the seller proposes, I want to resolve this, but I recommend you use all 3. So if you're a listing agent, you want the objection and termination to be the same because that really tightens up your deadlines, and then your resolution is going to be 2 days after. If you're a buyer's agent and you want to protect your buyer as much as possible, you're going to structure your termination and resolution to be the same date. They accomplish the same thing. Yeah. So there really isn't a significant difference. So that's how John Goodman said to structure it, and I see his perspective, but I think there are many different ways you can go on this one.
Okay.
So do it like this if you're the buyer, representing the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, all 3 are the same if you're representing the lister.
You're always going to want to stagger your resolution because buyer and seller need an opportunity to negotiate back and forth. So
this is a couple days.
if the buyer says, oh, the water heater needs to be replaced and the furnace needs to be cleaned, the seller needs an opportunity to look at that, review that, consider it, and then determine whether they want to agree to it.
So the termination then would match the objection 2 days earlier, and then 2 days later is the resolution.
Correct.
If you're the
listing.
If you're the listing
If you're the listing agent.
No, it's
And
so
I have to
confusing.
read it to know.
It's so
'cause
confusing.
That is really confusing.
It's
buyer match, these 2.
So would you think then that if I, as a buyer, send Mindy a contract, I have it set up for the buyer that she could counter
She could counter and
with
say,
those dates?
hey,
No.
I want your
we're gonna do it this
termination
way.
sooner to avoid us agreeing on a resolution and 2 days later you terminating because you still
terminate.
have that card. And that's the only thing we're trying to avoid.
Or you just.
Right, I just don't have the size.
Termination date.
Mine's up to
and make it the
Oh, I
resolution
see. Where you
Yeah, exactly.
What if it has
So
third level?
the language,
Yeah,
exactly. The third level was merely for those investor buyers that are buying a home as is, but they find mold or they find asbestos and they're not ready to tackle it. They don't ask the seller to fix it. They just terminate. That's the
But they
only
could have
reason.
always had their objection and terminated any time before resolution.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
But again, you know,
So would you recommend that on that termination deadline that mostly you put none, or since if it probably wouldn't apply, or would you recommend a date?
I would recommend the date. Yep. Just go ahead and match it with that resolution. Yep. Yes.
Just gonna say something maybe to keep in mind if you know you're competing, you already know you're gonna be a competing offer, to get real ticky-tack with dates and think, you know, you wanna write an offer that has the least chance of getting countered, you know? And so if you still feel your buyer's protected, you may wanna go ahead and just do what the listing agent would prefer right off the bat, so that you don't get mixed because yours has to be countered.
Exactly.
So maybe something to keep in mind if you know you're competing.
And that's always really good advice. We always want to try and structure the offers as clean as possible. Because like you said, if there's one little item that has to be countered, it's so easy for the listing agent and the seller to go, let's just go with these guys. They
I
did
don't
it all
wanna deal
right.
with that.
And, you know, that's always been a really good piece of advice in business practice. Before you write an offer, try and get that listing agent on the phone to find out what the hot buttons are. What are the things that your seller and you want to see in this offer? And they may tell you, we don't want to see an inspection termination deadline, or we want that as quick as possible, or we don't want to see, you know, something else marked in the contract. And if you can give your buyer that advantage or that leg up, I mean, that can make the difference between an accepted offer and not. So, but yes, very good comment. Any other questions on inspection objection, inspection termination, and inspection resolution? I think we'll be going over this one a lot just until we all get really comfortable with it. But feel free, even if you're a seasoned agent with multiple contracts under your belt, since this is the brand new version of the contract, until you guys all get used to it, feel free to send it my way and I'm happy to be a second set of eyes on it.
The existing loan termination deadline is a new field.
Yep, so we're gonna hit the other new fields on here. Existing loan termination deadline under line 17. Excuse me, existing loan termination. So it used to be loan objection deadline, and now it's a loan, oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're on the wrong line.
Nope, I'm on the wrong line.
Yeah.
Yep. 13, sorry, 13. New loan termination deadline. So we used to have a loan objection deadline where they would object, I can't get the financing I want, I don't like the terms, I don't like the interest rate, I'm terminating the contract, I want my earnest money back. They changed the name on it to new loan termination. The caveat to that, and I'm going to have you guys all turn the page because I want you to see this paragraph. If you go to section 5.2, they added in a line at the very, well, 3/4 of the way down. And I'm going to read it to you because I have it in red and you guys probably don't. Buyer does not have the right to terminate based on new loan if the objection is based on appraised value or lender requirements.
That's right.
That's new language. So how many times have you been a listing agent? You guys get through inspection, flying colors, title, every other milestone, and the appraisal comes in low. And the buyer said, I'd be willing to bridge the gap on the appraisal up to $5,000 if it comes in under listing price, and the appraisal is $2,000 less. Buyer goes through the appraisal deadline and terminates on loan objection. You can't quite tie whether it was because their appraisal came in low and they don't want to bring in extra money or what the case was, but they terminate on loan and you're suspicious that it was not because they couldn't get their loan or didn't like their terms, but because the appraisal didn't come in where they wanted it to. This now specifies you can't terminate on loan if it's appraisal related.
So if that person had a appraisal gap clause, I mean, that would be in breach anyway, right?
It would. It
Okay.
would. But we are seeing buyers that get cold feet at the end of the transaction when they think, oh, there's no way it's not going to appraise. We're going to be just fine. And then it doesn't appraise and they say, I want out. And the realtor says, but you agreed we can't terminate on appraisal because we don't have the ability to do that. I want out on loan. Tell them I can't get the loan that I wanted. Tell them I can't get the interest rate I wanted. And that's how they're getting out and
So
getting
they have to
the
come up with the additional cash then, regardless.
Yeah.
So you are bound to that.
if they wrote that provision in the contract. If they don't,
You offer that.
yes, if they offered that provision, they're bound to it. No, no. If on a normal transaction, when their appraisal comes in low, you have three options. Buyer and seller renegotiate the price, buyer brings the cash to closing, or seller drops the price to meet the appraised value. Those are your typical responses. But in a lot of these multiple offers, we're seeing buyers do that appraisal gap clause, where in order to make their offer look more desirable, they say, if the appraisal comes in low, I'm willing to make up the difference in cash at closing.
Which last year, still, we were seeing that situation. I
Yeah.
haven't seen that.
So this is one of those changes because of that they added in.
But how do you know?
And that's the thing, is how do you
Yeah,
prove it? How do you prove it? Yeah.
So, and the only time that it would really apply in your scenario is if the appraisal gap clause was in the contract. So if a buyer offers 450 and it comes in at 425 and there is no gap.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason they pass, which I can't imagine the agent allowing them to pass that appraisal resolution deadline. But for some reason they put their dates in wrong. I've seen people do that.
And they lose track.
They can't get the loan because now the guy wants them to bring the 25.
If they can't get the loan because they don't have the financial capability, then they could terminate because they don't have the cash in order to qualify for a loan.
Okay, that's my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you are correct.
All right.
Did everybody follow that?
Days.
Yes.
What if they do have the cash, but they don't want to close because the house didn't appraise? Then, and there's no appraisal extra language and additional provisions, then they still can't get out under loan termination?
They can't get out under loan termination. They have to get out under appraisal appraisal objection.
They have to be on top of it for their dates.
So yeah, in that scenario, Katie, they would have to get out under appraisal objection. If they passed appraisal objection without knowing it, then what happens is their earnest money is at risk. If they terminate at that point, which they absolutely can, they will lose their earnest money.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yep. And that's always the worst case scenario in any of these transactions. If you miss a deadline or the buyer wants out or they get cold feet or they don't show up at closing, generally the worst thing that happens is they lose their earnest money. You have a very angry seller.
But this one is really primarily based on gap clause.
Yes, this one is primarily gap clause or a realtor who's lackadaisical on their dates and deadlines. An appraisal comes in low and they tell their buyer, oops, I missed the date. We can't terminate on appraisal. Let's terminate on loan because they're never going to know. That's a no-no, and that's why they
appraisal. So you have that option.
No. Appraisal is before.
Appraisal is before loan.
Is it?
And the dates.
Appraisal loan is going to be the fall.
But it says loan is 2 days after contract acceptance, and on here you have 21 days for appraisal.
So that's loan application.
No, that's just
for applying for their loan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which most of the time your people are already going to have completed their loan application.
Right, they are.
So that's not an issue.
So yeah, loan termination is typically going to be about 2 to 5. I think I put in my example 2 to 3 days before closing, because you typically want on a 30-day closing, that's about as quick as a loan can be turned around anyway. On a 45-day closing, if you're trying to make your offer extremely desirable, you'll probably back that date up a full week, just because the seller wants to know everything's done. I can pack my moving van. I don't have to worry about a buyer bailing on me 3 days before. But in this example, I put loan termination 2 to 3 days before closing.
3
to 5. Or sorry,
You
3
have
to 5.
5.
3 to 5.
I just saw 3 to 5 and 2 right after.
Yeah. So any other questions on the new loan termination and that appraisal language in the paragraph? The other change that I want to point out on this date and deadline chart is property insurance objection on line 29. They just took out the word objection and changed it to termination. No significant language change in that paragraph. It's still the same, but you will see property insurance termination rather than objection.
What number is that again?
29.
Okay.
Stacey, is the existing loan stuff new? That doesn't look familiar.
The existing loan stuff doesn't apply. Buyer credit information, disapproval of buyer credit information, existing loan and existing loan termination, that all has to do with a buyer assuming the current seller's loan. So 95% of the time you guys are always going to write NA because that
just comes out.
Comes out.
That's actually completely disappears too if you.
It does.
It does.
Yeah, you can
can't
check a
even see
box
it.
and it will take it out completely. Yeah, because anytime a buyer has financing or is paying cash and not assuming the current loan, none of that applies. So the other thing I want to point out.
What's the property insurance termination deadline?
So that is the date that the buyer has to terminate if they can't get the property insurance that they want on the home. So your hazard insurance.
That could affect them not getting the loan if it's
Right.
too high.
If it's too much. So say the home's determined to be in a flood zone or an extreme fire area and the premium is astronomical. We want to have the ability for the buyer to terminate and say, I can't spend $10,000 a year on hazard insurance. And so that's when they get to terminate, is the property insurance termination. Good question. So moving down the line, we now, because we have a lead-based paint disclosure deadline, we have to have a lead-based paint termination deadline. So line 34, lead-based paint termination deadline. When do you think this deadline should be structured?
I think the same day as your inspection objection termination, those dates.
I like
because
that.
it's part of
inspection.
Part of inspection.
Okay.
So that would be.
All right, is everybody on board with put it as the same as your inspection, termination, or resolution deadline?
Tie it to the inspection wherever you're putting those two same dates.
Yeah.
So tie it to the termination date?
Or your
Inspection
resolution date.
So not the objection.
Well, it's just the disclosure. It's not like they're doing something about it.
So the lead-based paint termination deadline, the one thing I wanted to bring up to you guys, and I think tying it to the inspection is going to space it out appropriately. In the lead-based paint disclosure, you guys don't have one in front of you, but I'll read what it says on the back. That the seller shall permit buyer a 10-day period to conduct a risk assessment. So if your buyer wants to conduct a lead-based paint risk assessment, that date should be 10 days out from contract acceptance, which is pretty much going to fall in line with your inspection. Now, if your buyer decides they don't want to conduct a risk assessment and they waive the opportunity of objecting to lead-based paint, you could put that deadline sooner. You could none that deadline. If you already know, hey buyer, we're writing an offer on a house that was built prior to 1978. Do you have any concerns in this property with lead-based paint? Would you like to test? Do you want an opportunity to test? Nope, nope, nope. I'll sign the disclosure. I'll waive the opportunity. You don't even need a lead-based paint termination. Does that make sense?
Why would the buyer forego that time to do that assessment if the house is older than 78 and we know that lead-based paint was used then? Why wouldn't they
Because
wanna
the
test
way
for it?
to the abatement process is just to paint over it. So,
So if you're gonna
most of the
paint
time,
anyway,
it's been painted over already anyway.
got it.
There's some buyers that have extreme health sensitivities and that it makes all the difference in the world to them. But most of the time, these homes built in 1940 have had 10 coats of paint on top.
Yeah.
And, you know, oftentimes education is the key when it comes to your buyers. And sometimes buyers don't even know that they have a 10-day period because they don't read this disclosure. They just sign whatever forms you put in front of them. So sometimes they waive the opportunity to inspect because they don't even know they have the right to inspect. So it's all about you educating them. And that's part of your mastery and being more knowledgeable. But I have had concerned parents, and you give them the pamphlet and you let them decipher the information. You don't give your opinion on what you think they should do. That's up to them. But one of the things I have heard a husband tell his wife, honey, if we don't let the kids eat the paint off the walls, they will be fine.
We're okay.
That's great.
The only way you have a problem is if you ingest it in large quantities.
Yeah. For meals.
So you have to get under all those layers of paint.
So if
and-
they're scraping it off the walls and they're swallowing it, they've got a problem. But nonetheless, they do have that
You don't
10-day
really want to do
period.
that with latex paint. either.
But the only reason I bring that up is, again, if you are competing against 2 or 3 other offers and your buyer says, I don't care about it, I'm not worried about it, this could make your offer look stronger by not having that terminate. It's one less contingency that the seller has to go through.
So that is one place where NA would be kind of effective.
Or none.
None.
Or you could
Still
put
none.
None.
Yeah.
Yep.
Still none.
None.
Okay.
Because you want the seller to notice that it's not being utilized.
Right.
Yep. But you don't want to
10A, so
exclude that
makes
entire
sense.
paragraph because, you know, it's federal law. I mean, they have the
They
right.
still have
So,
that right.
Yep. Exactly. All right.
Have you ever had anybody do an inspection? on lead-based paint?
I have not had a client do a lead-based paint inspection. We've had several equity agents that have had clients
Really?
In the last couple of years, because I've gotten calls
Do the
saying,
test.
do you have a recommendation on someone who can test for this?
We've had them test for asbestos, but not lead-based.
Yeah. It's very rare, but we'll get 2 or 3 cases a year. for
And so
someone
if they
like this.
have it, then they just test it, and then they're like, okay, well, you just have to paint it. That's it.
So you can have someone come in. It's a pretty extensive process where they take all the paint off, and it's kind of like a asbestos abatement. They can abate the house of lead-based paint if they want. I wouldn't do it. I mean, ceilings, doors,
Because then you're
trim.
just
I mean,
releasing it.
Exactly. You have to quarantine things off and clean vents, and I mean, it doesn't make sense.
So
It
it's
doesn't make sense.
part of the education process is, hey, it's sealed up. Why would you want to disturb that? And they're really only going to check the first few layers of paint anyway. They don't go all the way.
That was my next question. Do they actually know how many layers back it is? When they test it, if they don't see it within a few layers, it's.
But it still has to be your decision from your
Right.
buyer.
Yeah.
Got it.
All right, so just so that we can make it through this entire contract, let's keep pushing forward. We're on page 3, guys, and it's like 11:15. Well, we've gotten through a lot of the hard stuff, so I'm going to breeze through purchase price and terms. Pretty self-explanatory. You're going to write in the offer price. You're going to write in the earnest money. You're going to write in the buyer's new loan, and then, of course, through simple math, determine what the cash at closing is going to be. So.
I'm sorry that believe it or not, I have a question.
Oh,
Today,
of course.
Yeah, it's sending an offer. My clients are conventional.
Okay.
Pre-approved with CHAPA down payment assistance.
Okay.
So legally, cash back, they're not being paid what.
Right.
Do you still put the cash there? Because when you get the pre-approval letter from the lender, it says, well, purchase value 340, for example. New loan 320, just for an example. That means that we're missing 20,000, right? You get 5,000 for earnest money. We're still missing 15,000.
Right.
Where do you disclose that if the seller asks the listening, where are the other 15 if you're not bringing cash at closing?
I think it's on line 9. I think you would put it cash at closing.
No, that's what she's asking. That's what she's asking.
You can use one of the other lines, you said, right? Where it's got,
No, I mean, I have seen.
CHAPA.
Yeah, because with the CHAPA is bringing,
Giving the down payment, it's giving the down payment assistance. And
right.
I have seen that it can disclose some additional provisions. Well, buyers are already done with the process of CHAPA class of payment system. They're through the process. And that kind of explains to the listing agent, but I will think, well, maybe there's a more competitive offer.
Sure.
I say that there's cash coming. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So I think there's a couple different ways you can do it. What Ray suggested, you could put CHAPA on line 7 and put the amount that the CHAPA loan is going to be contributing, or CHAPA is going to be contributing to that down payment, so it zeroes out that cash at closing. I think that would make sense. Otherwise, if you don't put CHAPA in on that line and zero it out and it shows 15 grand, I would put in additional provisions, $15,000 cash at closing provided by CHAPA.
Is that kind of dual between?
Either way, it's going to be noticed.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
too, for the pre-approval or here.
Yeah.
And I think that's where my buyer's second choice for sellers right now.
So yeah, so I
conventional cash.
don't know that it matters how you do it as long as you do it. As long as you reference in there, cash at closing 15,000 is coming from CHAPA, or you reference it here and it shows 0 as cash at closing. Yeah, you're welcome. Good question. All right, so section 4.3 is earnest money. Obviously, earnest money can be tendered in the form of a personal check, a cashier's check, or wire. And then you're going to put in who the earnest money is to be held by. So that's the title company or the real estate company that's listed in the MLS. I want to get into some of these other changes. So I'm going to breeze through good funds, payment of funds, loan limitations. The one thing I do want to say under section 4.5.3, only because we've seen some challenges with this, I want it to be on your radar. Whatever box you mark is what the buyer has to stick with. So there used to be a provision that said, as long as a financing change doesn't adversely affect the seller, the buyer can make it without disclosing it. So if they're going from an FHA loan to a conventional loan, they didn't need permission, or conventional to FHA, they didn't need permission. The problem is FHA loans could be viewed as less desirable because the appraisers are more stringent and there could be lender requirements for the buyer to get the loan. Conditions. So if your buyer is wobbling between going conventional or FHA, mark both boxes so they can do either one. And if you,
So you can mark multiple.
you can mark multiple, yep. Mark as many, if they are potentially going to use their VA benefits, but they might decide they want to do something different. Mark as many boxes as you think will be applicable. Because what has happened is a buyer goes, oh, I'm going to do conventional financing, you mark conventional. You get halfway through the transaction and they say, I can get a better rate, I can put less money down if I go FHA. And then the seller says, I'm not going to sign an amend extend because I don't want to worry about appraisal and I don't want to worry about lender requirements. I selected this offer because it was conventional.
Right.
We had
They may have
three
turned
of
down FHA.
Exactly.
Plus, there's additional time.
Yeah. Exactly. So educate your buyers on, if you're exploring your loan options, I need to know, are you set on conventional? Are you set on FHA? Or do you want the opportunity to choose between the two? So that's my piece of advice on 4.5.3. Of course, when you're in a multiple offer situation, having a conventional loan is always, conventional or cash are going to be king. Cash normally trumps unless the purchase price is extremely low.
Right, a low ball cash offer is not.
I've seen a lot of conventional offers that will waive the majority of their contingencies and be above list price that will get accepted before cash. So it can happen. It can happen.
Is that a seller out? Can that get the seller out of this if the buyer changes the loan?
Not necessarily, no. There are very few outs for a seller actually in this
Right.
contract. I'm going to point
That's what
out
I
a
thought.
couple because this contract is structured in favor of the buyer. All the termination rights are typically in the buyer's hands. What the seller does is they say, I'm not changing the contract, and that forces the buyer to move forward or to terminate. So they can force the buyer's hand to potentially terminate.
But they can't.
But they
Terminate.
can't send over a notice to terminate and say, because you want to change your financing, I want out of the contract. They don't have the right to do that.
Would
Same
that
with
be
it-
amend extend that the buyer's agent would send over and
Yes.
say, we want to change our financing, and then he can say, nope, not doing it.
Exactly. And most of the time, if you're in an amicable transaction, you can figure out a way to make it work. If realtors are on the same page and, you know, the buyer says, hey, if there's any lender requirements, I'm going to take care of them. You don't have to take care of them. There's different things that you can do. But yes, an amend extend would make that modification. Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say about loan. Seller financing, we don't do any of that. That's all handled by an attorney. We talked about loan application. We talked about loan termination. So let's go into, since we were just talking about lender requirements, I want to take you guys down to section 6.3, which should be on page 6, I believe. 7. Okay. Sorry, I've got a different printed version. So page 7, section 6.3, lender property requirements. The reason why I want to point this out is they added in an automatic termination clause to this section. So let me get a different copy here real quick. Okay, so it now says if the lender imposes any written requirements, replacements, removals, or repairs, including any specified in the appraisal, known as lender requirements, be made to the property beyond those matters already agreed to by the seller in this contract terminates on the earlier of 3 days following the seller's receipt of lender requirements or closing, unless prior to termination, the parties have A, entered into a written agreement to satisfy the requirements, the lender requirements have already been completed, or the satisfaction of the lender requirements is waived in writing by the buyer. So let's do a scenario on this one just so you guys can grasp the concept. Appraiser goes out and says the roof is shot. And the buyer and seller thought that the roof was going to be okay. Inspector said, it's 5 years certifiable, you should be fine. But the appraiser says, nope, gotta go. So they make that a condition of the loan. Buyer can't get the loan unless the roof is replaced. The buyer objects on the appraisal and says, roof needs to be replaced. Seller says, I'm not going to do it. If they can't reach an agreement, this contract terminates automatically in 3 days. You don't need to send over a notice to terminate. You don't need to initiate anything. It automatically terminates. So they can either negotiate, yep, seller agrees to put a new roof on. What I'd like to see is a scenario where number 3 occurs. The satisfaction of lender requirements is waived in writing by the buyer. How can a buyer waive the requirements? They can't get the loan without
Exactly. That was going to be my first question.
The buyer doesn't, I haven't seen a scenario where the buyer has the ability to waive that with the lender. I'd like to see one because I want to know how that could be utilized.
Okay.
But in number 2, the lender requirements have been completed. What we have seen is sometimes when there are requirements and the seller says, I'm not going to do it, the buyer says, I will pay to do it. And they're actually allowed to do that.
They are?
They're going to make an improvement. We don't recommend it. They're going to make an improvement to the property. And if they don't get that loan or close, they're out the money. It's a benefit to the seller. So the seller is at slight liability by having a contractor on their property doing work to their home.
Because it's not their home.
Because it's not their home. But the way that things are structured, the buyer could actually do that. I wouldn't recommend it with a roof, but if it was a water heater or a hand railing or something, the buyer could say, I want this house so bad, can I send in my contractor just to put in that hand railing? And Mr. Seller says, sure.
But it has to be done before closing.
Has to be done before closing because the appraiser has to come back out, take pictures,
So
send it
at
in.
closing, though, the closer sits there and says, have you done any repairs or whatever to this property
that have not been paid for.
That have not been paid for. Okay. Okay. So as long as that buyer has paid for it in advance of closing, they could.
Yes.
So would
even
they-
up to and including a roof.
Would they need the proof
Terrible.
that they paid for it at that point in that scenario where they say, have you done any of this? Would they possibly
I think it would be wise to
Title
provide
company.
title company with that proof to show that there's not going to be a mechanic's lien.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not an advocate for this scenario, but if it keeps a transaction
Kinda
together,
dicey.
I want you to be able to advise your buyer of all their options. I never like a buyer stepping on a property that they don't own, investing money into it, and then a seller saying, oh, your contractor broke this while he was there. Now who's, I mean,
Exactly.
it can open up a can of worms, but if it's something small that needs to be done and the buyer says, I want it done and I will pay for it, you can do it. They can do it
No
with
idea.
seller
but
permission.
I would have said no.
Is there a way to protect the buyer in that scenario so that they can go ahead of it with it and
We're not attorneys, so we can't draft any sort of a document that says, hey, seller relieves buyer of all liability. I mean, that's not within our realm. We're able to present the options to the buyer and allow them to choose how they would like to move forward. But for us to draft up some sort of documentation,
but the buyer could have a document drafted?
yeah, they could
So-
they could hire an attorney and say, hey, I
And
want a
have
written
it-
agreement.
Right.
Absolutely.
Don't you think that would really scare your seller off? I mean, that would really scare the seller off, is bringing in
A
an
legal-
attorney and
Yeah.
going through all this other stuff.
Yeah. Again, not ideal,
They see it.
but
Yeah.
so I just want you guys to be aware of that automatic 3-day termination. All right, so let's see, other big changes. Let's flip to section 7.3, association documents. A lot of this stayed the same. They elaborated on the documents that they want HOAs to provide to buyers. So section 7.3.1, most of the language stayed identical to our contract from last year. Section 7.3.2, they're asking for some additional meeting minute disclosures that they be provided. Section 7.3.1 is a completely new paragraph. So they're asking for a list of all the association's insurance policies, deductibles. That's all now going to be part of your HOA packet when you get bylaws, governing documents, CC&Rs.
7.3.3.
Three?
Yes.
Yeah.
What did I say?
One.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I went back up. No,
7.3.3
Okay.
is new. 7.3.4 is also new. The association now has to provide a list by unit type of the association assessments, including both regular and special assessments. So some communities, assessments are assessed by square footage. So not the whole community isn't necessarily the same monthly due fee. So now you're going to be getting a report that outlines this unit pays this much, this unit pays this much, this unit pays this much. So you can see complex wide what that difference looks like. Financial documents under 7.3.5 stayed the same, but 7.3.6 is new. They now have to provide any written notice of construction defect action, because that does affect the buyer's financing and whether they can or can't get a loan.
Which one?
7.3.6.
Does 736 imply that it's already been mediated, arbitrated? Because there's always been the notice that construction defect suit is under file. That's been there.
Yeah, this just says within the past 6 months, whether the association has approved or disproved. Does that answer your question?
Well, it doesn't address it if it hasn't been acted on yet, but
Right.
there's a suit in process,
Mhm.
which was always, you were supposed to be notified.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll dig into that one a little deeper.
What's the scenario for 7.3.6? You have one?
I don't have one. Yeah, I really don't have a scenario for that one. Other than, let me see if I can think up a scenario for that one.
We had one in a community we moved into up in the mountains. There was a construction defect filed, and we didn't know. It wasn't disclosed in the minutes. The board had private meetings, and it was like, oh, this is what's going on. We had no recourse.
What is a construction defect?
Something's going wrong in the drainage of a common area,
Or
and
they-
it's impacting the structural
Or they applied
integrity.
siding incorrectly and it's
Falling
leaking into the home or something, anything like that, where the HOA is suing the builder.
Why would the HOA be involved? in a construction
Because it's their area. It's their studs out. This is only, yeah.
But it may also be homes, multiple homes, where sidings, stones are falling off.
Yeah, it could be like a townhome complex or a condo or a patio home or, yeah, a community center, anything.
So it's
that-
usually
So the
newer
HOA would be involved
construction.
because that's their,
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
what they're
'cause
It's their
responsible for.
responsibility.
Yeah, and typically builder warranties in Colorado are 10 years. So most of the time, these are on, like you said, newer communities because they're suing within that 10-year period. And saying, Mr. Builder, you were neglectful and didn't do proper drainage or didn't compact soil, and now we're having structural issues. And
I
so,
feel like
yeah.
these HOAs are going to come up to speed to be able to provide all this information fairly quickly.
Well, and that's the thing, is we were all wondering that when this contract goes into effect January 1st, are these HOAs going to be on board with being able to get all this stuff to us?
Mhm.
Hopefully everybody's in alignment.
So here's one of the things that, for you and Todd for being mastery, Shelley and Vance and I have gone to this our third contract class because
There's so much to learn
Right.
and
to
so
learn.
many different perspectives.
Right.
So one of the classes provided this information that I thought was pretty interesting is that, and this was Damien's class
Okay.
for what it's worth,
Yeah.
was that by law, HOAs, wherever this
There's a statute.
adopted under 38, 33.3, 209.5 CRS. That statute requires all HOAs to provide an annual disclosure to their owners. In that annual disclosure, it lists all these things where in parentheses it says annual disclosure. So by rights, the seller, if you're the listing agent, should be able to ask well, no, they should have it. They should have
a copy
and
of it.
so 90% of this should not be required to be asked of the HOA, because the HOAs are now charging these astronomical prices to provide this, where the seller should have 90% of this in their annual disclosure. So what the intent of the changes in this was to make it less expensive, easier to get, and that you could get it from the sellers as opposed to having to even go to the HOA.
Or if
That's
the
what
seller
I
says they don't really have a copy of it, which who doesn't file all those things away? But
Yeah, don't you just say all the
Just
stuff
right
you get
away
from your
into-
HOAs?
it would be cheaper for the seller to get a copy of that from his own HOA as opposed to the buyer's agent trying or
the title
company
company
trying to get a copy of all this.
Sure.
And so that's one thing you can do as a savvy listing agent. One of the values that you bring to your clients is helping them avoid some of these costly fees that these HOAs are charging. A lot of these HOAs nowadays have portals for their owners, and you can go on the portal and you can download every single one of these documents. So if you don't retain it when you receive it annually, the other thing you can do, and I've done it personally, so I know it works, if the HOA doesn't have a portal because they're not up to speed with technology, the homeowner can email the HOA and say, I would like a copy of my annual disclosures. I've misplaced them.
Yeah.
And the HOA has to provide it.
Yeah.
They have to provide it.
I
and
don't
at
think
no
they
cost.
can even charge,
And at no cost. So yes, title companies will grab all this information for those that, don't want to jump through the hoops to get it themselves, but it will cost anywhere between $200 and $400 to get it.
Nowadays it will.
And
they'll charge the
sometimes-
seller.
Sometimes
Which
the
they
charge
prefer.
isn't even the deal. It's they won't take the time to do it.
Yeah.
It's trying to get these HOAs to give you those documents that takes so much time sometimes.
But yeah, if you can sit down with your seller and say, hey, do you have a portal that you log into for your HOA? Let's log onto the computer together and I will help you download those documents. You can save them a lot of money. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thank you, Pam, for that. No problem. So we're actually going to skip over a couple pages. There isn't a whole lot of check boxes as we go through section 8. Not a lot changed through there. They took some wording and moved it from one paragraph to the next. But I want to get into something else that I think was an interesting change, and I'd like to get your guys' perspective on this and create a little conversation. Under section 10, where we start to talk about seller's property disclosure, they made a really good change under 10.2. They previously had disclosure of latent defects / present condition. They've now changed latent defects and taken that out, and they've written adverse material facts. So a latent defect is something that's dormant, something you can't see. I had a leak in my master bathroom shower. It came through the ceiling. We had a plumber come out. They fixed it. We had a drywall guy come in. We retextured. We repainted. Inspector can't even tell. Seller had to disclose that. Sellers always have to disclose that. Realtors are held to a higher standard than sellers according to the real estate commission, in that anything that a real estate agent knows about the property, they have to disclose. According to this purchase agreement, not the seller's property disclosure, it has different language. Seller's property disclosure is not a required document. A seller does not have to fill it out. If they sign this contract, they are agreeing to disclose latent defects. Only items that are dormant that a buyer could not tell. So a seller could say there's a crack in my foundation. Anybody, a 5-year-old child, could notice that crack. I don't have to disclose that. That's an adverse material and adverse material fact, and I only have to disclose latent defects. They changed that wording for the good.
Show us where it's changed.
Instead of
Section
10.2,
10.2.
instead of latent material fact.
In the 2018 contract, you will see the wording is latent defect. It now says adverse material.
So I thought, I just didn't understand the way you said it. So it's, you said they have to now disclose latent, but that's not what
No,
you're saying. They
have to disclose
adverse.
all adverse materials,
It
which
evened it up,
includes
right?
latent.
Which includes,
Exactly.
It evened it up, right?
It evens it up.
Instead of us being totally responsible, now
It
they
now
are at
puts
the same
They're at the
responsibility.
same responsibility level as we are. Yep.
Because they could say, I don't want to say anything, and you would say, well, I have to, and then you're in conflict with your seller.
But if it's obvious that the drywall was repainted or patched,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be said.
Correct, under the old contract.
If you can see
If you can see it, if a buyer can walk in and identify that there was an issue, the seller didn't have to disclose it according to that paragraph. Now on the seller's property disclosure, it says adverse materials. So when a seller fills out the seller's property disclosure, their responsibility is they have to disclose everything.
all those things they
Existing,
fixed.
pre-existing, whether you can see it, whether you can't see it. So the seller's property disclosure helped override this paragraph. Now they've gotten this paragraph to match the seller's property disclosure.
Is that only the time that they've owned the property? Like, let's say that they bought it and there had been significant structural issues that had been repaired. They would need
to disclose that. As
forward.
long as they know that information, they have to disclose it. It's not just the time that they were in the home, it's any previous information they have.
Because they may have gotten that information when they bought it.
Yeah.
So adverse material defects or facts. Adverse material facts would also include environmental issues,
So
like a warehouse being built on the empty lot that now
Power
has
lines
cattle
coming in.
grazing on it, or power lines coming in. Our particular neighborhood that Vance and I live in is going to have huge power lines coming in. And we already have a power line. Yeah. Well,
You now have to tell.
well, we would always tell them, and you can see the initial power lines, but now bigger ones are going to come in along that same path through Parker, and
But you
that
have to
would be
divulge that.
considered.
Yes. So
that
anything
this.
that might negatively affect the property is an adverse material defect. That includes health risk, that includes environmental hazards, and that includes building violations. We have an unpermitted basement. Your seller tells you that, that has to be disclosed.
Anything that would change the decision of the buyer.
Correct. So yeah. So I just wanted to point out that language change because it's a nuance that a lot of people wouldn't pick up on unless it was pointed out. But now sellers and realtors are on an even playing field, and this contract now matches what a seller's property disclosure looks like. So good change. That was a very good change.
That's good change.
Yes. So under, let's see, section 10.10, we did already talk about lead-based paint. We now have a disclosure deadline. We now have a lead-based paint termination deadline. I wanted to add NAR, National Association of Realtors, who you pay your realtor dues to, is the one that got this changed. They are the ones that lobbied for this in our contracts. So when you're trying to decide why you should be paying your dues and where to find value, this is one of those good changes. All right, so since we already talked about that stuff, let's jump over to another hot button, section 13, transfer of title. This was a big change. You want to know who lobbied for this one? Title companies.
Yeah.
So let me tell you a little bit of background on this.
Sorry, what number did you say?
Section 13, transfer of title. Unless a box is marked, all buyers will automatically get a special warranty deed.
And it used to be
That's a
general.
And it used to be that we would write in on the line what type of deed.
It didn't default
So it
anywhere.
didn't default anywhere. So what title companies, and this is actually something I did not know until I took the class from John Goodman, who's an attorney. When we as real estate agents write in that we want our buyer to get a general warranty deed because it's the most comprehensive coverage, we want every buyer to have that. That general warranty deed is supposed to have all the exceptions from the title commitment on your Schedule B2. It lists out everything that's accepted and not covered. That is actually supposed to be recorded on the deed of a general warranty deed. And it's our job as real estate agents to make sure it's recorded correctly. I did not know we had that responsibility, nor do I want that responsibility. I don't know what the exceptions are supposed to look like on the deed, and I'm not supposed to be reviewing it and making sure that everything's on there before it gets recorded for my buyer. That's a lot of liability. The reason why title companies weren't filling out their general warranty deeds with all those exceptions is because now it's public knowledge. Any other title company can pull up that document and they don't have to do a title search. It's all the work's done for them. So title companies didn't want to disclose this information that they worked so hard at their title plant to dig up. They didn't want to share it. So they lobbied for this automatic special warranty deed because you don't record the exceptions with the deed.
Okay, so this is always so hard for me.
Well, one title company would do all the work, and another
all
title
the
company
subsequential title companies
could just look at that.
Could just look at that document.
And it could be wrong.
It could be wrong.
And it could be wrong. So there might have been 6 exceptions back here, and then this title company only listed 4, and then we were liable because
we didn't read
the something from before.
So
Am I understanding that right?
Our liability falls in that any contract you wrote in 2018, 2017, 2016 that you wrote general warranty deed, and I've written plenty of them, you were supposed to make sure that that general warranty deed had every single exception listed on it. And none of the title companies did it that way.
Right.
So.
And how are we supposed to do that?
And we're not educated to do that, nor did we know that was our responsibility. So it was just brought to light that these title companies lobbied to change this because they're starting to get cracked down on that they have to list out these exceptions, and they want these special warranty deeds rather than the general warranty deeds, so they're not displaying all their information to the public. So what's going to happen, and I guarantee we're going to see rate increases from the title companies because now they're going to charge more if you want a general warranty deed than if you want a special warranty deed. We haven't seen that change come, but I have a feeling that's coming down the pike because a general warranty deed is a lot harder for them to prepare than a special warranty deed is going to be. Mm-hmm.
So they don't have to, if it's defaulting to the special, they don't have to go
beyond the current owner. Yeah, because the difference between a general warranty deed and a special warranty deed is one is warranting all the way back in time, and one is only warranting during the time that the current owner owned it.
Why would anybody want a special
Yeah.
warranty? Well, that's what everybody's getting now. But why would you want that?
So here's the thing. The person that's responsible to warranty is the seller. The seller pays for this general warranty deed, special warranty deed, personal representative deed. So if there's a claim that results on your buyer when they move in, someone says, hey, I have rights to this property, you are going back to the seller. If the seller says, I gave you a special warranty deed, I'm only warranting the time that I own the property, and this claim is before I owned it, I owe you nothing. You have a title insurance policy called Owner's Extended Coverage. There's a box in here to mark. It's a $60 charge. We tell you guys mark that box every time because title insurance kicks in, and title insurance says, I'll help you figure that out.
Okay, so that was going to be my huge question.
Yep.
So as long as we have provided them with extended or advised our buyers to get the extended warranty and the seller has agreed to it, then that's going to kick in for their previous. Oh, well,
It's
then
going to
I don't
kick in.
feel so bad because I was feeling terrible.
So I will say this, and then I will back up and correct it a little bit. I will say in 99% of scenarios, it doesn't matter whether you get a general warranty deed or a special warranty deed because you have title insurance. The only time it's going to matter is if a developer or a builder or a homeowner from 50 years ago has rights to a subdivision that your home is built in, and the title insurance can offset some of the cost for this for you, but you lose your home. They can't give you the rights to a property that someone else owns, but they can give you monetary compensation. So that's why I want to say, yes, it doesn't matter what type of deed, but in an extenuating circumstance where someone has rights to a property and you have to move out of your home along with all of your neighbors, you might get monetary compensation. You can't keep your house.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is that something that we would be, because that's so confusing, is that something that we would be sitting down in our buyer's consult and say, well, we're going to only ask for a special warranty deed, but we are going to get that extended coverage, so you're going to be covered before and after in that gap. But if somebody comes back from 50 years ago and wants the whole house, I mean, is that something that we're going to have to know how to say?
That's going to be a real tough thing to articulate.
It's like a drug commercial, you know. You should take this drug, but you might get
and you might die.
Right. You know, it's like.
But you get monetarily compensated.
From your title policy.
I mean, I will say
What would your suggestion be as to let it go to the default as long as we mark that box? Or what do you think?
I think when you write this offer, it's going to be very important for us not to assume what type of deed our client wants. Before, a lot of us, myself included, have just assumed I want them to have a general warranty deed because it's the best coverage. I will always recommend the general warranty deed to my clients, and I will let them know if there's a difference in cost.
Stacey has sent 6 offers since January. All of them are only offering special warranty.
And some of the MLSs will write that, they'll write that in. And they will, yeah. So if they don't have that written in, then you might as well go for the general warranty deed, especially if there's not a cost difference.
Can a buyer change, right? If he wants to pay for it, go from special to general. That will be a buyer's
But then
choice.
aren't we as agents stepping out and taking liability if those exceptions are not on that deed?
They're not
Then don't
correct.
we have the responsibility to check that
The
general warranty deed to make sure that the title work matches the
Yes,
deed?
and that's why it's complicated to do a general warranty deed, because you are taking on that liability of making sure that the title company is listing those exceptions and that they do match that title commitment. But the thing about it is, if you tell your clients you have this option of a general warranty deed or this option of a special warranty deed, and whichever route they want to go is the route that they go. So if they want general warranty, you step up and you make sure this matches this.
And would you be able to get help from your title company to get that done? Because that's who I would normally
I would go to my closers and say,
exactly.
hey,
Okay.
I know this revision of the contract occurred, and I just now have been educated that I'm responsible for double checking this general warranty deed to make sure you guys did it right. Can we work together on this?
Yeah. Yeah, because I would know.
Because that's their job.
It's funny
But all you're doing is you're cross-referencing. You're not researching. You're not going above and beyond the scope of your business. You are merely taking the title commitment and looking at section 2B and seeing if what is listed is also listed on the general warranty deed. That's all you're doing. Does this match this?
So,
and it's not up to you to determine if those exceptions are correct.
Okay.
If those exceptions are nope.
Are you saying
That was
for
my-
closing that you're going to do this? Because I mean, I already do it.
I wouldn't do it in
from
closing.
the standpoint of whenever I get it, I just look at section B.
Right.
To see what's
And just
on
look
it,
at those
see if
exceptions.
there's any liens or anything like
That's
that.
why we need to know how to
Well,
read title commitments.
we look at that, but if I'm understanding this right, I mean, we do that too. That's where we look. But I never look at
the deed.
a final
At the final
deed
deed,
to
right.
see if those section B items are
Because right now
on that
they're not.
deed.
They're not.
They're
the
not
title
on
companies
there.
haven't been putting them on there.
And for their $5 Scrivener fee,
Yeah.
they have exempted themselves from all liability, and it all comes back on us.
Everything is your fault.
Everything is,
Not always.
that's
not
just
always.
that's like my kids.
So just be aware of that. And I think educating your clients and not telling them if something is better than another, but giving them documentation like your lead-based paint pamphlet. Here's the difference between a general warranty deed and a special warranty deed. What would you like?
Where could we get
Where's
that
that?
information?
What is that?
We need
I
a
know.
brochure.
I know. We either need to have a
Title should
title
give us
company put
something.
that together, or
Yeah.
we'll have to get something from Google to put together and equity brand it. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
That'd be
I
good.
just think
The
that's gonna
difference
be.
between slim
So one last thing that I want to go back to loose. I always say that wrong. Her 6 deals that all say special warranty
They didn't?
because if your guy wants a general and they're only offering special, then do you just,
I did my research with title, well, at least from non-title and Google, you can change it as a buyer. You have to pay for it.
They can pay the
I'm not
difference.
100%, but I make a call to, hey, what is the situation, what can we do? You have to pay for it if you want to go from special to general.
what
I wonder what that costs.
do we
Yeah.
do we know how much of a difference that is?
I don't know.
You didn't find that out.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll ask.
It'll be different from
Yeah,
title
just a
company
good
to
question.
title company.
Yeah, but I'll definitely ask.
But did you lose the offers? Were you on the buyer's side of that? And you lost all of those?
No,
Because
but
of
we
that?
are as a backup in 2 properties, but still showing houses.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, and what I am hearing a lot of sellers say is I only want to offer the type of deed I got when I bought the property. If I got a special warranty deed, why would I warrant all the way back in time? I'm only going to warrant what I received.
Because sometimes if you
That's
buy
what
from the
else
bank,
we
that's all they would give you.
That's exactly. Seller won't be able to offer you more. What would he want to? If I get a special warranty deed when I bought the
One
house,
day they're
oh, I'm gonna offer you more.
Yeah, I'm not ever going to.
So with all that being said, there's actually some legislation out there right now that is maybe going to combat some of these issues that we're having with general warranty deed, special warranty deed, title preparing the deeds the way they're supposed to, realtors being responsible for reviewing them if that's how the buyer chooses to move forward. So we may see a change in the next year on this section if that legislation goes through. So
Okay.
I'll keep you guys apprised. But as of right now, be cautious on this section, be knowledgeable.
There was something that was said at one of the other classes about indemnity, which I don't know what indemnity really is, and that you might be asked to sign an indemnity clause or
Okay.
something. Do you know what that means?
At closing?
Well, I don't
or-
know. They
Some
just
of
said
the
it's
title companies are
the
sending
title
that out.
companies will send out this indemnity, and basically it's really bad and you're not supposed to sign it.
Oh,
And I don't know exactly what it is, so I thought I would make sure I asked you.
yeah.
Because
I will
could you
make a
find
note.
out about
Mhm.
that? Because, and I'm,
They said some of the smaller title companies are sending these indemnity forms to realtors and have them sign it, which is basically putting the liability on us.
Okay.
even though the liability is on us because they're only the scriveners, there's something else with that indemnity, and I really don't understand.
Okay. I wrote that down. I'll find out and I'll
Which
get back
makes
to
us
everybody.
double secret liable.
I know, right? How to keep us all.
I mean, we've
out
all
of trouble.
already been with a target on our back for a lot of things, and then
Okay, because I
more.
still want to hit the FERPTA section and I still want to talk about this new, let's go first to 15.3. So under section 15, closing costs, closing fees, and association fees. Section 15.3. This is not on your date and deadline calendar, folks. Status letter and record change fees. At least 14 days prior to closing, seller agrees to promptly request the association to deliver to buyer a current status letter. Not on our date and deadline chart, but we got a 14-day requirement. So you guys are gonna have to start paying attention to this.
Is it new?
This is brand new.
Why didn't they add it into?
They added this in because oftentimes listing agents or sellers, not intentionally, but would drag their feet in requesting a status letter. And that tells if there's a special assessment coming on the property. It tells if the seller's current on their HOA dues. And it tells if there's a capital, shoot, I can't think of the word, where the buyer has to not a capital improvement. It's like a capital investment. Like they have to put in $200 to the HOA when they sell, they get that money back.
Transfer.
But it tells you if there's one of those. And so listing agents were kind of dragging their feet a little bit on requesting these status letters. And HOAs, if a status letter isn't requested 14 days prior to closing, they consider it a rush request and they nearly double the cost.
Okay.
So if a buyer was responsible for paying for the status letter and the seller didn't get the order in time, the buyer was stuck with the bill. And I mean, even the seller, some of you mark seller pay status letter, and the seller gets stuck with this double bill and going, why is it twice as much? We've got 2 weeks before closing. This is not a rush. A rush order is 2 days before closing. So they added this in, which escalates the process and gets the seller and the listing agent to request the status letter quicker so that there aren't these exorbitant fees. And because it helps your buyer know if there's a special assessment that you guys didn't know about or any fees that you guys didn't know about before you get to day of closing and go, uh-oh, there's a $5,000 special assessment. What are we going to do? So it's kind of preempting some of the problems that we had. Now, one thing that you guys need to be mindful of, cash transaction, 10-day closing. How do you request a status letter from the HOA if your closing's only 10 days out? You can't do it 2 weeks. You have to write in additional provisions modifying this.
Okay.
So it's going to add an extra step for you guys if you have a closing that occurs sooner than 14 days. Does that make sense? If you have a closing that's going to be in 10 days, you can't meet this 14-day deadline.
But
So you have to change it.
Can't you avoid that? If you know that the closing is coming, you have that date.
You have 10 days in this.
So say you write a contract and your buyer's paying cash and they say, I want to close by this Friday. I've got the money, I'm ready to go. You can't request the status letter
So you can.
4 days ago.
4 days ago, exactly. So then in additional provisions, you're going to override this by writing something to the effect.
Buyer intends the property as is.
I would just shorten this status letter. Status letter shall be requested 5 days prior to closing.
Yeah.
Instead of 14. I would.
And you would put that in additional provisions. So it doesn't necessarily require an amend extend.
Nope.
It requires additional verbiage.
In the provisions
In the
to override
provisions.
this. Yeah. But if you're doing a standard 30, 45-day closing, you're not a 60-day closing, you don't have to change this provision at all. It's just fine. It's just something for you to monitor, especially as a listing agent. Because it's not going to come up in your little tickler on your dates and deadlines because it's not listed on your dates and
Does it have
deadline
to be
chart.
that current, or if I list your home, can we go ahead and request that?
You can go ahead and request a status letter. Typically, the title company will then ask for an updated one to make sure nothing has changed. Because if you request it on, say, January 1st and dues from the seller haven't been paid yet for the month, they might not post the payment, and so the seller won't get credit for that. So they'll just have to get an updated copy, but those come really, really quick. So they could request.
And is there more cost?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm guessing the HOA probably charged another fee. Probably not the same amount as the initial one. But something to research with the HOA to find out if that's a cost-effective way to go about it. All right, so let's talk about FERPTA since we're running a little short on time and I want to be respectful of you guys.
If it's a regular closing, this is not an issue.
Not an issue.
Can you then add it to your dates and deadlines on one of the blank lines? So that it's all together with your dates and deadlines?
I would just do it on your own personal calendar or on your own personal copy. Yeah. Section 15.8, whole new paragraph this year, FERPTA. So FERPTA is Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act, and it only applies to foreign sellers. So a foreign person selling their home. IRS collects a 15% withholding tax. And the only reason this is important to you guys as buyer's agents is if for some reason the seller doesn't pay that, the liability and responsibility can fall on the buyer. And the buyer can get stuck with that bill because the IRS doesn't care who the money comes from. They want it. So there's a box here that allows you to mark whether the seller is a foreign person or not. How many times do you know whether the seller you're writing an offer on is a foreign person?
Yeah. I don't think that that's, you're crossing lines saying, hey, because it's in the contract, it's not a or whatever thing, it's just, hey, I need to know because, you know,
So,
I'm doing the box.
I agree with that. I think you shouldn't make an assumption and check whatever you do it every time. If you want to check the box, check it in every contract. If you don't want to check the box, leave it empty in every contract. But my advice is don't check the box. And if you have a conversation with the listing agent about, hey, what closing time frame is your client looking for? Do they need a rent back? Is there a certain price or terms that we need to come in at? And by the way, the new FERPTA section, to your knowledge, is your seller a foreign person? I don't think that's disrespectful. I don't think it's crossing the line of, But I don't think you should make assumptions when you're typing in the seller's name in the contract going, it's not John Smith, it's such and such. That looks like a foreign person to me. I'm going to mark the box.
We're kind of profiling, aren't we?
We are profiling. So I recommend leave the box blank if you don't know the answer. If the listing agent is someone that you can get in touch with and ask that question, most of the time when they take the listing, they are going to know that information. Sometimes the seller might not disclose it, but I think we're all getting a little more savvy to ask some of these questions. What this really does is it opens the line of communication in the beginning of the contract process. Because what we're hoping to do is make this a positive thing and get title companies to send out the FERPTA affidavit to every single seller regardless. So when the title commitment goes out to all parties, the FERPTA affidavit goes to the seller and they sign it whether I am a foreign person or I am not a foreign person. And we're just wanting to head that off sooner than closing date because we've had buyers show up at the closing table and equity agents and you find out from the title company, we just realized the seller's a foreign person. And we now have to collect 15% of the sales price. And the seller says that's absolutely ridiculous and they're not going to sign the closing documents. And your buyer's got a moving van waiting in front of the house, ready to go. And you're going, what do I do? So we're hoping to head that off sooner and alert you guys on whether we're dealing with this 15% withholding or not.
So is title doing that?
Yes, most title companies, and yes, I will answer your question in just a sec. I know First American for sure, when they send out their welcome email, that FERPTA affidavit is attached. So it's in the very first correspondence and they ask for it. And if they don't get it within 48 hours, they ask for it again. I can't speak to Land Title and I can't speak to Stewart Title or Heritage Title or any of the other ones, but I know for sure because I did a transaction with First American and I was like, wow, they are on top of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So question online.
Yes, I have a real quick question on this. So if your seller is a foreign person, what now are they all, okay. What if they are a foreign person, but they are here legally, but they aren't, I mean, they're not a US citizen. How does that come into play? Does it matter? I mean, they're paying taxes, they're doing whatever. Are they under different guidelines? Do you know that?
U.S. income taxation.
This is the second.
What if they're selling and buying? Selling and buying at the same time.
Okay, so here's just a general situation. My husband, not a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
But he lives here.
If we sell the house, but he's got his green card, but he's not a U.S. citizen. Yeah, he pays a buttload of taxes.
It says for the purposes of U.S.
So the green card. So I guess that's what I'm asking. If you run into one of those where he's not a U.S. citizen, he is a foreign seller, but he's here. I mean, I guess I don't understand how you differentiate that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and that could potentially be an accountant question, or the title company would probably be able to answer that because I don't know.
What is the definition?
Because when we sold our house, Yeah, when we sold our house the last time and we bought the one we're in now, it did come up at some point. But our lender was like, oh, no, it's okay because we have his social security, we have his all of this, but
Yeah,
his,
that makes sense.
his green card.
Yeah, you're a permanent
So
resident.
he has all of the things. Yeah, he's a permanent resident. He's not a U.S. citizen, but he is a permanent resident. So he would not be, I think that.
In my opinion, based upon what I understand, and I'm not an IRS tax code professional, but he would be exempt from this clause.
Okay, I just wasn't sure how that was going to play out if I ran into that somewhere, other than my personal situation.
Exactly. But yeah, I think leaning on the title company and leaning on an accountant to decipher between those different scenarios is probably going to be the best route to go. Good question.
That's a good question.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great question.
Client that has a company here.
Yep.
They have an ITIN account, with the IRS. They pay taxes, they rent a house through their company. It's still foreign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have to. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, that's outside the scope of our practice, so that
think
is not
this
for
is
us to determine.
Mostly for foreign investors, but if they lie about it, is the buyer still liable?
Well, actually,
Yeah.
I hope we don't come up against that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I hope we don't come up against that.
because like you said, the IRS doesn't care where it comes from.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're past 12 o'clock. Anybody online that needs to depart, anybody here that needs to depart, feel free. The only other thing that I wanted to point out was just a modification in the signature section. There's a couple other changes that we didn't get to go over, but you will find that you now have to put your broker license information and our company license information in there. If you use CTM, it should auto-populate into your contracts. But now you have your name, your company, your phone number, our company ID, and your license number.
We no longer have the rejection.
And we no longer have section 32, counter or reject. There is no box for the seller to acknowledge whether they looked at the offer, whether they're rejecting the offer. I mean, how many times did you even get that signed anyways?
Especially a long time ago when we had 29 offers on a house and you didn't sit there and have them reject every offer.
So, well, any other questions before we wrap up? I know it's a lot of information and we went through it pretty quickly. So I'll keep teaching different versions of the class just to make sure that you guys are feeling confident and competent. But thank you guys all for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Awesome.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yes, you're very welcome, Katie.
I enjoyed the Zoom version.
Thank you.
It's nice to have that option, even though I still think it's better to be there in person, but it's nice to have that option. My car's in the shop, so I didn't have a choice.
Well, it works out perfectly. Yeah, when you can't get here, at least you can still learn.
Yes, thank you for having that.